You are listening to Latinx America, a podcast focused on highlighting catalysts who are using, leveraging, or creating technology to help our community achieve more. With your host, Adriana Flores Ragade. Hector, thank you so much for joining us at Latinx America. We've been trying to get you here for a while, so I'm excited to learn a little bit about what you're doing and also just in general about your space. I am so excited again to be co-hosting this episode with
Richie Nunez.
Richie and I have been collaborating. We are at the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Summit, thanks to Frank Carvajal, and we're excited to be connecting with you today. So why don't we start discussing your journey into tech? I mean, you're now working for like the up and coming crypto world. So tell us a little bit about what you do.
Definitely. I mean, first, it's a pleasure to be here. Adriana, I really appreciate it. Richie as well. Thank you. You know, for me, it's interesting. So for me, I always like to kind of start with my background in terms of being a first generation college student, first person in my family to graduate college. And, you know, my parents and my older brother coming from El Salvador. And so a lot of the things that I learned along the way in terms of just the values that I'd like to kind of put into the space and some of the learnings and kind of helping others comes from just my parents. And I always like to shout them out for that. So for me, when I was going through college here locally at USF, it was focused on an accounting degree. A lot of my teachers at the time were like, hey, you know, you seem to have this affinity for math and just this understanding of numbers. Accounting is a safe approach, right? As I learned, though, being in the city and connecting to different people in the space, I learned about tech. I learned about finance. So two things that were really fascinating to me that I really didn't know about before. Started out my career in accounting at KPMG and did a few years there in corporate tax. From there, I actually wanted to get into sales. I felt like I had a personality that fit a little bit. I wanted to engage with clients a little bit more. And so that's what led me to the next step of finding a sales opportunity. From accounting to sales, it's an interesting switch. Not many people do it. But for me, it felt natural, and I was definitely guided by some amazing mentors at the time. My mentor at the time was working on a funding portal company. So as things like Regulation CF, which allowed access to greater investment for a lot of people, he invited me on a blockchain project that he was working on. This was mid 2017. And he said, hey, you know, if you really want to learn about the sales stuff, go lead this. And it was around learning and educating myself on companies that were going through the time through ICO, through initial coin offering. And essentially, my goal and my role was to connect to these companies, whether it's through meetups, through email, through LinkedIn, calling them. And that was sort of my first venture into the crypto space, learning about some of these projects and then providing a solution to them to be able to help them raise funds.
Going back a bit to your origins, can you just tell us a little bit about what growing up was like where you're from? What was that experience like for you?
Yep. So I grew up, so it's funny. So my family's Salvadorian, right? I'm super proud of my roots. My brother, he's 11 years older than me. And in 89 is when my parents and him came to the US. So he was 7 years old at the time. So I was born in 93. So since as a kid, that Salvadorian pride was always instilled in me. Like I always let people know I was Salvadorian. You know, growing up in school, elementary, middle school, people were like, oh, like you're Mexican or this or that. I'm like, no.
Everyone's Mexican, right?
There you go, right?
My husband who grew up in Kentucky, he looks a little Latino, but people are like, are you Spanish? I'm like, that's not even, but yes, you're Mexican, right?
Where exactly is it that you grew up?
So I grew up in South City, so in the Bay Area. Yeah, but the funny piece is that, you know, my brother, you know, just messing around with me as a kid, right? He's be like, you know, you grew up in the U.S., you know, you were born in the U.S. He's like, tú eres un gringuito. I'm like, nah, like I'm Salvadorian. I get really upset and always like kind of stand up for myself in that way. So yeah.
That first generation experience that you had, how did it translate for you over into college, into the white collar world, tech world? Like, what's that experience been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think thinking back on my journey, like I mentioned, I was blessed, right, to be a part of just having an education. Like my parents always instilled that in us. You know, my dad went to 6th grade, my mom went to 1st, and, you know, then they had to work for their families and help provide, right? So when they came to the US, it was always about that access to education and really helping me out in terms of making that a staple for me and my brother. And so I always valued it. right? I always wanted to be a part of different type of clubs, connect to teachers that, thankfully saw something in me to kind of push me towards college and identify certain opportunities like that. And then when I got to USF, is when it really hit me, right? I saw other Latinos, and being a freshman was definitely a different experience, given that, I was like, man, a lot of these students are coming from these private schools, getting these tutors, getting this education. Where do I fit? And so one thing that I'm really proud of is just building the community of Latinos, whether it was through being a resident advisor in the dorms or through being a part of the Salvadorian Student Union, USEO. And that was my way of sort of connecting with my people and connecting a larger group of Latinos to kind of find different opportunities.
You would say that building off of that community, that's what helped you get through that entire process of, white collar world, college, all these new experiences?
Definitely. When I was a junior, senior in college, it was like, okay, what's the next step, right? So at that point, I was involved with the honors program at USF, involved with Beta Alpha Psi, which was an accounting sort of club that provided you with opportunities and access to some of these big four accounting firms. And that's what led me into that space. And so connecting there was a new journey in terms of kind of my first experience corporate at KPMG, where it was about navigating a new system and understanding a new system and trying to find who were the players in the space that were kind enough and had a greater vision to be helpful and to guide me in a way that was helpful in my career so that I could pass that on to other students, right? Whether it was through an Alpha or Latinos in Finance, which is an organization I'm now a part of. That was sort of the goal there. Yeah.
So, Hector, when we hear crypto and we hear blockchain and we hear Bitcoin, sometimes we, especially for those that care about diversity and diversity issues, I've heard people say that if our community doesn't learn about crypto, that we are going to fall really behind, or if we're not investing in a certain way. So can you talk about what crypto is, what Bitcoin is, and just a 101 on it?
Yeah, definitely. The way, I believe that. I think we definitely need to be there. Latinos, we need to be a part of that conversation, whether it's deep at the technology layer through engineers, whether it's later on, kind of where I'm at in terms of the business development side, right? There's always a need in the space right now, especially as companies are growing. In terms of Bitcoin and kind of what it is, the way I see it and the way I kind of come to understand it is essentially prior to the internet, prior to sort of these payment processors that allowed us to transact with each other off, not being in the same place, there was a system of just me giving you $1. And if I give you this $1, you know that you are now in possession and in ownership of that $1, right? When we introduce, payment processors or sort of third parties, what happens is that it's a benefit from the perspective of, well, me and you don't have to be in the same place for me to transact that value, right? But again, it's a risk as well because you're introducing a new party to sort of participate in the transaction, right? We see a lot of hacks, whether it's data or even funds being stolen, that sort of kind of speak to the risk of introducing a third party into that transaction. Mm-hmm. So with Bitcoin and blockchain in general, it was this idea of being able to go back to that trust of me providing value to you without a third party, right? And so now the system was invented, right, to essentially provide value without those third parties being present. And in terms of the technology behind it, that's something that the developers it's developer created, right? It's through tech. And so that's something that we're learning on every day. But it's just fascinating to see the environment of Bitcoin and blockchain in general in terms of creating a solution where we have something digital that can be transferred without it being copied and replicated. So when you think about a PDF that gets sent, I can send you a PDF, Adriana, and I can also send it to Richie. And now you both have possession of that PDF. What the blockchain does is essentially say, hey, I have some Bitcoin. I sent it to Adriana. I don't have it anymore in my possession. I can't copy it and send it to Richie. So now you have possession of that crypto, of that Bitcoin. So that's how I come to understand it. And, there's a lot of learning to do still, but it's a fascinating space to be in and just kind of looking to learn more and also invite other people into the space.
So how does one invest?
That's a great question. I think that's a really important question because for me personally, when I started working, I immediately started, figuring apps like Robinhood out, trying to learn how can I invest in stock? What does this mean? Doing research, right? right now, there's a lot of places where you can earn or buy crypto, right? One of the ones that I use the most is the Cash App. So that's the Square, who created a Bitcoin app, or an app where you can buy Bitcoin. And so it's a very easy and seamless process. And it sort of operates like a Venmo as well, where you can send dollars and funds to another person. But that has to this date been the easiest experience for me in terms of buying Bitcoin.
So you just download the app and then just purchase through there?
So you download the app, go through sort of that verification, KYC, and they want to know who you are, connect the bank account, and then you're able to buy Bitcoin and buy crypto.
Can you give some examples of how the Latinx community will be left behind if they don't adopt Bitcoin, if they don't adopt blockchain?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're still seeing it, right? It's still developing. For me personally, I see a lot of interest in the space, being in it every day. But then again, I don't necessarily see it at the consumer level sometimes, right? I think that one of the things that is important is just to be curious, right? Like, I think that some people say, oh, I believe in blockchain, but I don't believe in Bitcoin. And for me, it's sort of like, well, it takes a lot of time to understand it. So first, it's about educating ourselves in terms of what this is and what it can do, and then understanding how we can apply it to different situations. A lot of people are skeptics around the whole ICO craze in 2017 in terms of somebody creating a token and selling that token to investors. But for some time, and even now there's different iterations of it, that was a way to get funds for your business. And as Latino entrepreneurs, I think it's important to find ways to understand, how can I help my business thrive? And a lot of times we deal with the funding issue, right? And so, kind of to your question, right, specifically, there is a new way to fundraise. If there is a way for me to sort of provide capital for myself or my business, and there's a new technology to do this, then why shouldn't I take a look? Why shouldn't I learn more?
So how can someone get into the space, either working for a company that is doing crypto or maybe supporting organizations? I know that Wall Street has recently, within the past few years, actually, they're taking crypto, Bitcoin very seriously. So how can someone join the space, and what kind of preparation do they need?
Yeah, I love that question. I think for me in my journey, I sort of waited in terms of the grand scheme of things, the larger sort of view of the space. Prior to the company where I'm at today, I looked at where the landscape was and where these companies were, these blockchain companies. And what I noticed was that they were still in the building phase, right? And even now they're still in the building phase. And so as somebody that wanted to step into the business development world side of things, where does business development fit prior to a company being built and a product being built, right? One thing that is super intriguing today is sort of the idea of, how do you get consumers to not understand, but just interact with blockchain apps? And sort of the work that needs to be done there is sort of the design and the user experience. And I was speaking to somebody today that is working on that. And so I think that's really cool, because there's going to be a point, I believe, that you're not really thinking too much about what blockchain is. You're just interacting with a new type of app, right? That's kind of the way I see it. But in terms of like specifics and what somebody could do to learn about companies and learn about people in the space, I think meetups is a great way. Meetups are the way that I learned to kind of just talk to people in the space and learn from them. Super intimidating in the beginning, but as I spoke to more people, I learned a lot more. And then Telegram is pretty big in the crypto space. A lot of people are on Telegram, and a lot of conversations are happening on there that aren't happening on other mediums.
Just a closing question I wanted to ask was, there's somebody with your exact same story, right? From you growing up, the adversity, the struggle. What piece of advice would you give them for them to continue pushing on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say just go for it, right? I think that the interesting piece for me was that when I was going from accounting to sort of that next step in my career, I was looking at what direction I wanted to go. And now I realize that it's okay to kind of step back and understand which direction you want to go prior to taking that next step. But back then I was looking into more traditional finance and trying to get into some type of role in that capacity. And, what I found was that I really wasn't done with the whole business development side of things. I wanted to learn more. And then now I find myself in a place where we're speaking to a lot of these financial institutions that are looking to learn about crypto, looking to learn about the space, and we're trying to provide a solution for them. But in terms of the advice, yeah, it would just be to go for it, right? Like understanding that things change, the landscape changes, technology changes, and there's new opportunities that come along with that. And how do I position myself in a way to be in the position to capture that opportunity?
Thank you, Hector. So how do people connect with you and hit you up for information
Yeah,
or a job?
sure. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. You can find me through those directions. The cool story I have with Telegram is that I created my my username sometime like a few years ago, where a lot of people, I guess, were actively engaged or were starting to become engaged. And so my tag there is @CryptoSF. So I joke with people. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna hold on to that one for some time, but there'll be a time when people are gonna want it, and we'll see if I pass it on.
Yeah, now you can sell it. You can sell
Exactly.
that thing. So.
Exactly.
Hector Martinez from Latinos in Finance, thank you so much.
Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Latinx America and on Twitter at America Latinx, or email any questions or ideas to latinxamerica@gmail.com. Gracias y hasta la próxima semana.